Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar from the IRFU on looking at tackling dropout amongst young players. You're very welcome to today, and today we have a host of expert speakers who will be talking through this issue, which is quite prevalent in a lot of sports. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in our first speaker. I'm delighted to bring in Ken Moore, who is the Leinster Rugby coach and player development officer. And Ken is going to give us a sort of a breakdown under our topic in terms of the retention recruitment, and also probably looking at the reasons of, why do players drop out as well. So Ken, you're very welcome, and thanks a million for giving up your time today.
Thanks very much, David. I'm just going to share my screen here really quick. Yeah, look, good afternoon, everyone. Ken Moore is my name. I'm Coach and Player Development Officer for the Midlands area, and I've just got a couple of slides here which hopefully will give a little bit of information around why children drop out of sport, what you can do from a practical sense around designing your training sessions from a coaching point of view, and looking at that environment too to try and keep players involved with your teams and in your club. So first of all, this is some interesting research into why children drop out of sport by Crane and Temple. And I suppose the first thing that is said in the players' own words is enjoyment. That, look, players actually follow just because they don't enjoy the environment, they don't enjoy playing the sport anymore. And the first thing that I think is really interesting is there's not enough playing time when it comes to our sessions. And that might be that there's too much time standing around maybe in drills and not enough time playing rugby in training sessions. The other interesting point is around the coach and that coaching environment. That maybe at times it can be too serious, or the sessions can be too adult-like. So it's really important that, as coaches, we're talking to at the children's level. We're not using jargon. We're making sure that we're encouraging and supportive, and that we're not aiming our coaching sessions or delivering a diluted adult version. Finally, then around enjoyment, sometimes training can go on for too long. I give an anecdote of a coach I used to coach with, that the only reason that these players left was because it got too dark, but thankfully they went and got some floodlights. So I think it's a non-stop training sessions now from now on, but just making sure that you're hitting that golden window of 60 minutes thereabouts, where there's really short and sharp activities, and you're trying to prioritize children playing in games as much as you can in your training sessions. The second reason that they found was a perception of competence. So how good do the players actually feel at playing the sport? And it's very evident that children play sport because they want to be good at something, and they'll stay longer in that sport because they are good at playing that sport. So it's really important from a coaching point of view to bear in mind that every child develops a little bit differently. So make sure that you're patient and you're supportive, and you're encouraging players as best as you can to engage with your activities and your games and your small-sided games, which gradually over time challenge their skill set, and you'll see that development, and hopefully the children will really enjoy that environment and that content, and then they'll see themselves getting better over a gradual time. Finally, then, I suppose the third reason why children drop out of sport is social pressures, and sometimes that can come from parents. I'm sure you could identify children in your own squad that maybe are only there because their parents have played the sport before. Sometimes there could be too much pressure from coaches as well, that they're not just enjoying it because they're getting shouted at maybe at times. And finally, then, friends are a huge indication of whether a child stays involved in a sport. A lot of children play sport because their friends play that sport, or if their best friend goes and joins another team or even another sport altogether, they might decide to change as well. So it's important that we actually give a little bit of free time or a little bit of free play to encourage them social interactions and build friendships in our training sessions. So it's really great to see, and I know my own Twitter feed is awash with all rugby clubs around the area coming back and getting back to training. So it's great to see But it's really important to bear in mind that some children may have a little bit of a higher level of stress and anxiety about returning to sport, because, you know, look, they haven't seen their friends as much. They maybe have had time to reflect on whether rugby is actually for them, whether they're enjoying their interactions with their friends and stuff in that environment. So it's important that after this really long layoff to invest a bit of time into reigniting them social bonds between players. And as coaches, we can help drive that by making sure that we have really engaging activities. So we're not going back in and we're spending the first number of weeks going through our drills and trying to go in that way. We're putting them into games. We're putting them into enjoyable activities where participation is high and engagement is high. Driving that quality social dynamics, again, given an opportunity for the children to engage with each other, not through Twitch or through TikTok or whatever the kids are having themselves, but to actually face to face and to have a bit of fun with each other and to strike up them relationships again. And finally, then it's important that it's the appropriate setting that we're trying to drive. You know, we're not coming back, and because we've had a layoff for so many months, that the first few sessions are going to be fitness or anything serious like that. That, you know, we're gradual here, and we're playing as much rugby as possible in our training sessions. Finally, then, what can be done to keep our players, and some really interesting research around the quality of early learning experience that children have play a really important role in the lifelong participation in that sport. So if we take children up to the age of 14, the better early learning experience that child has in that sport will mean they'll stay in that sport for longer. And a term that I really like at the minute, and it's something that for children at this age, I'm trying to drive in my clubs, is deliberate play. So these are designing sessions that are maximizing enjoyment and engagement through games and through play that are structured. You know, you're using adaptive rules that are governed by whatever you're trying to achieve or whatever your outcome is for the session. And I know that on the Leinster Rugby website, we've got really good small-sided games and teaching games. I know on the IRFU website there's some really good stuff through the work that Colm, and he can go through it at the end on Hive, and it's really worth going and having a look at it. But it places an emphasis on teaching games to help develop that player's decision making and problem solving and skill development, as opposed to, I suppose, training in isolation or putting an emphasis too much on drills. So I'd really encourage you to maybe have a look at that term deliberate play and see how much you can get the kids playing and just striking that enjoyment. So look, that's it for me. Thanks very much. I'm going to hand over to Conor now.
So basically, look, thanks a million for that. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, I suppose, your approach, guys, as coaches, and just to try and build a little bit of a conversation that you might start between you and the coaches in your club. What we've got at the moment, we talk about the role of the coach, and, you know, the role of the coach for you guys is, like I was kind of making notes earlier on of, you know, typically when I've been helping with underage teams, whether it be mini teams or kind of youth teams, first year teams, under 14s, under 16s, you kind of go through all these things that you do, you know, organising the pitches, training plans, organising fixtures, and the role of the coach tends to be something that piles up and piles up and piles up. It tends to be quite an all-encompassing thing. And what I'm going to try and do today, or really briefly, is just to kind of, I suppose, maybe introduce the idea of thinking about what we do when we look at recruitment and retention as coaches. Now, obviously, this isn't a case of trying to create another job for you, but it's trying to create a conversation around, you know, and maybe philosophy might be the right word, but maybe an approach to what are we doing to keep the players that we have and to try and bring more players into the club. Personally, for myself, I don't really have a philosophy when it comes to rugby, but if it is a philosophy, it's I want as many kids, boys and girls, that are living in a specific area to experience rugby. And look, we've all had good experiences. Rugby has been brilliant for myself, and I just want people to have the same experience that I've had with it. That, you know, what we've got at the moment is we've got probably a lot of kids coming through the gates of rugby, and rugby is very popular at the moment. But what we're looking at today is, could we go a little step further? Is there anything we could do to grow those numbers and to offset maybe some of the drop off that happens in youth sport? So what we know about the young player, and some of this will be a little bit of a crossover with what Ken was saying. So, I'll just go back. So, sorry. So what can change at the moment? So players kind of coming out of mini rugby, guys. What we probably see is they're a little bit more involved in their decision making. So they're a little bit more, involved in what they're going to use their free time for. When they're a little bit younger, they tend to kind of go, they have a little bit of a schedule. But as they get a little bit older, they're starting to decide, okay, I have less time, so this is kind of what I want to do. We talked earlier about the external pressures that are there. So they're multi-sport athletes in a lot of cases. They're playing Gaelic, they're playing soccer, they're starting to play in secondary school, and there's a lot of overlap with their sports, and a lot of the time it's kind of going all year long. So there is external pressures there that we kind of have to be aware of, and these are things that that we've got to manage, and it can change from when they come from mini rugby. Obviously the time pressures that are there as well. They have homework, they have less time in the evenings and stuff like that. So again, they're things that we need to think about when we're talking to players, when we're trying to be aware that maybe players are starting to either think, how am I going to balance everything? And sometimes it can be sport that can fall. So by us being aware of these things, they're things that we can talk about. Obviously, as well, we see the kids, they play sports for a variety of reasons. So, some kids are down there dreaming of playing for Ireland, playing for Connacht, playing for Leinster, Ulster, Munster. Others are just there because their friends are there. And others are just there because maybe they don't really have a reason. Maybe it's just that's where they go. So we've kind of got to be aware of that as well, that not every kid is there to win the cup. Not every kid is there to, to try and play for an underage squad or be on a development squad. Some kids are just there to have fun and have the crack with their friends, and I suppose that's the challenge. We've got to try and provide all things to all children. And then I suppose ultimately, and this is something that we'll talk about when we look at recruitment, I think children, as they come out of minis and they start to change and they start to looking for something that's they're looking for a challenge, whether it be a physical challenge or a new sport or something they haven't done before. And I think that's a big strength for us. That's a real big positive for us. That's something that we can kind of latch on to. So if we look at the things that don't change though, and again, there's a little bit here of what Ken was saying. So even though their time is getting shorter, they'll always find something that they enjoy the most. Like when they're trying to organize their time, the thing that they enjoy will the thing they'll never give up. So that's something that, that's really important. Now, that doesn't mean that the sessions are just exactly what they want to do and they're just, kind of devil may care. Obviously, we're looking at them, being structured, and we want them to, be playing games, as we talked about, and having fun. But, the thing that they enjoy and the thing that they think about first is the thing they're going to go back to. They also enjoy playing well, competing and improving, as well as playing games and having fun. They're really, really important for young children or for young kids. And then we also believe, and all the studies are there, that winning is nice and they do like to win, but it's pretty low down their priority. And it's something that we shouldn't let kind of drive on what we do. Other things as well, guys, when we talk about participation, for me, participation is not a straight line. So kids will come and go from the game at times. Sometimes at under 10, it'll be their first love. At under 14, it might be quite low down. And under 16, again, it might be something that they love again. The challenge for us as coaches is to kind of manage those situations where it's not their first love, and to, not to give up on players and to keep those players in the game. And then finally, I suppose, for me, participation is that ultimate success. So, not everyone can win the cup, not everyone can get picked to play for Ireland, but what we can do is, if we can keep players playing the game and manage those times when there may be a threat of drop-off, if we have our players coming through and staying in the club and staying in the game and being the next generation, that's the ultimate success for us, I think. So off-field considerations that we kind of, that I'm going to, I suppose, challenge you and your coaching team to talk about is, having philosophy around inclusion and training in games. So, how do we talk about that as coaches, about how players start games, how many friendlies we play, recognizing players early on to see, maybe are they starting to drift away from the game, or are we seeing, where they're not as involved. Player retention and seeing warning signs. So again, as coaches, when we come out of minis, are we keeping roles of players? Are we how players are turning up to training, and do we have a kind of an approach to, well, if a player doesn't turn up for a couple of weeks, are we giving up on that player, or are we following up to try and find out what's happened there and to try and keep everyone involved? An approach to recruitment, which we'll talk about in a sec, is, again, do we have a plan around recruiting? Players coming through the gate, that's one thing. Players looking to join up to contacting the club. But, is there anything else that we have? Have we ever discussed that as coaches about how we go about recruiting players? And then finally, how are we engaging family members? So again, our first and our most common interaction is with the player, but do we have interactions with the what we say there is, we create further links between the club and the player. So again, if the family members are involved and are, invested in the team and the club, the chances of the player staying, increases quite a lot in those times when they may be thinking about dropping away from the sport. So if we look here, guys, these are just 6 little headings that I'd be probably trying to challenge you guys as coaches to talk about and think about. So, as coaches, I know we all sit down and talk about our rugby and our fixtures, and, we do our session plans and stuff like that. So what I'd be saying is try to take a little bit of time in the next few weeks, if you can, just to get together, whether it's after training session or whether it's online or whatever, and just to talk about these things. So firstly, an agreed philosophy with coaches and managers. So what are we trying to do? Like, for example, as a coach, do I think we should have 40 on my panel? Do I want to get the numbers as large as we can? Or are some guys thinking about trying to win the cup? If we can try and agree on a philosophy of what we're trying to do, what success looks like for us, and, in terms of numbers, I think success is, constantly trying to grow our players, grow our player pool, trying to keep the players we have, and then looking in the area to see, is there more players that we feel would like to come down and play rugby with us? That philosophy, is something that we can agree, and that will drive on our actions from there. Obviously, the next step then is including parents and players in this. So being open with the parents and players, look to say what we're trying to do here, guys, is, for example, we're trying to get 2 teams going so that more players play rugby every weekend. That might be one thing, or we're going to play a league game one week and we're going to play a friendly one week. And our philosophy is that everyone starts one of those 2 games. That might be depending on our numbers. But what we want is we want the parents and players involved in this. Number one, because we want them to try and buy into it, but also that they can become advocates for that, and they can, they can have branches out into the community, whether it be GA or soccer or school, and they can start to talk to other players and maybe bring them into your club. Have this, but building a relationship with your club CCRO. So your CCRO in your area, do you talk to him? What schools is he in? Does he identify players that have shown an interest, and maybe all it needs is a little bit of a follow-up to try and get that player down to your club? And even if you feel there's a shortfall of, if you think you need more players, can that CCRO target some schools and target some age groups for you? Down below then, guys, communication with other sports coaches. So again, all the good players, all the strong players, they all play multi-sports, and what can happen is burnout, and they can have where there's an overlap and they're having to make a choice between training. Can we work together as coaches? It's a small pool we're picking from. So can we work together? Can we manage maybe a really talented kid that's on lots of squads? Can he come down, or can she come down every second week, rather than giving them ultimatums where we're forcing them too young to choose? I think all the science suggests that multi-sport athletes are the way forward. So, can we work together both with those schools and club coaches? The last 2 then, guys, is tight for growth. So as coaches, if we're moving through, can we constantly look for different things? Do we talk about tours? Do we talk about bringing in new coaches, bringing in little challenges, keeping training fresh, keeping it different, keeping it varied, and keeping the players on their toes? And then also growth is obviously, as coaches, we're trying to improve and upskill, but also always trying to, bring more players in and to constantly keep reinvigorating the thing and not rest on our laurels. And finally, guys, with recruitment, for me, I suppose it's all about being rewarded, about going the extra mile. So for example, if we have a philosophy that we talked about first, if we have a philosophy around recruitment and retention, how are we prepared to talk to that CCRO? Are we prepared to talk to that coach that's in that school, and talk to the players about their friends and their family that we could bring into the club? Not just being there and coaching what turns up, but also saying, right, having a little target in my head, I want to grow our squad here by 20 or 30% this year, because we feel that'll help us field 2 teams, which the knock-on effect is we feel we'll be able to have more players playing rugby every weekend. They're little targets that we can go, and it's a thing that we can get excited about. So we can have really good quality on the pitch, good training sessions, fun, a lot of game-centered approach, and then we can also get excited and proud of a constantly growing squad with bigger numbers and more kids getting to experience the joy of rugby each week. So look, that would be for me, guys, just a challenge for you guys. I know there's so much good work going on in the rugby side of things with playing games and game-centred approach, which is across the board in mini and early youth. The challenge for you guys now is just to have that conversation. Have you ever actually sat down and talked about where you'd like to go with recruitment and retention, and where you'd like your numbers to be, as you know, and it would be another sign of success for your group? Okay, that's all from me. Thanks very much.
I'm going to bring in Colin Finnegan now, who's the Children and Youth Development Manager with the IRFU, just for some of his kind of thoughts on this, and maybe he has a few questions he wants to put to the lads as well. So Colin, thank you. You're on the other side of the fence now, because many of you would know Colin from presenting a lot of these webinars, but we're on the other side of the fence now, Colin, so you're very welcome, and thanks very much for joining us.
Cheers, Conor. Yeah, look, I'm actually in the more resplendent surroundings of the station house in Monaghan, just to really get the whole experience of being on as an expert as opposed to a host. So no, look, thanks a million for bringing me in. Look, I suppose a couple of key things I would have brought out of the two guys' presentations, and such a wealth of knowledge. But you know, some of the things that I've seen is, like, are we aware of what some of the pressures are for young kids coming back now? And again, this is a different time than we've ever had before. So we need to make sure that we're extra mindful. And Ken, I know, spoke about, you know, understanding that anxiety and those pressures around it. And even something as small, you know, one thing to take away would be those social pressures, and you're talking about their friends and getting to interact together. But you know, a big part of this is we're now putting people into pods. So can we make sure that they're with their friends when they're in their pods? Because again, that's where they're going to get their social activity over the next while. That's where they're going to get their interaction. And you know, I suppose some of the other things, you know, from Ken's point of view, you know, is the engagement of the activities, and are they engaging? Are they enjoyable? You know, why are kids coming back? Why are any players coming back in this current time to our rugby clubs? And we have to be so mindful of that. And again, to give a kind of a personal example of something that we kind of saw at the weekend, was, you know, some of us were out in the club, and a coach is running a fitness session with the under 12s, and they're literally spending 40 minutes doing up downs, press ups, sprints, all these sorts of things. Now, if that is what the kids have come there for, absolutely, work away. But I would think that the kids have probably come to a rugby club to go and play rugby. So are we giving them enough time to be active, to enjoy rugby? You know, we'd often be asked, what is our role in rugby? As a coach, as a volunteer, as someone who works in rugby, all of us have the same goal: to give a positive experience of rugby and help more people to be active. So can we go and do that through our sessions? Ken, look, just one quick question for you. I know you spoke about, you know, how we don't have enough playing time. People have had, you know, lost out an awful lot of skill development time and fitness through this. You know, so what would be one of the ways, I suppose, that you would incorporate either of those activities into a game, so you're actually getting the best of both worlds?
Yeah, Colm, I think it's just about what first of all, what do you want to achieve during the session? So, and what do you want to get out of that activity? So if it's passing, well, then just change your coaching lens to maybe adapting the rules that promote passing, that encourage more passing, and try and do it through that way, as opposed to maybe getting too technical with the players from early on. You know, you can get technical within the game scenario, but at least that it's a little bit more realistic in regards to the matches that they do play. So yeah, just trying to, again, change your lens and having a little bit of a think about what you want to achieve from that session and from that activity.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, and it's that clear understanding for both you and the players of what you're looking to achieve. And you know, I think it's hugely important that we understand that and we get that message across, because if that breaks down, we can often get muddled in our sessions, and then the enjoyment can go out of it. You know, Conor, you spoke about participation being the ultimate success, and I couldn't agree more. What we want to see is vibrant community clubs with players who play to whatever level they choose. You know, whether that is underage, whether that is adult, you know, anything can be encompassed within that, and we allow people to find their own level. You know, Going back to when we used to deliver coaching courses, one of the tutors would ask people, what's your goal for the season? And 40 coaches in the room would put their hand up and say, we want to win the league. So he'd be like, okay, so 39 of you are going to be very unhappy because you're all coaching in the same league. So we need to reassess, why are we there? What are we hoping to achieve out of it? And then that gets reflected in our philosophy. And I know you spoke a bit about that, Conor. Just if we want to just delve a tiny wee bit more into our philosophy, could you give an example of just anything that could be part of a coach's philosophy, just to kind of let people out there have a bit of a better understanding?
I think the whole thing with, it's quite a simplistic thing, and I know when we talk about this, the philosophy of having as many kids experienced in rugby is maybe it's seen as a little bit idealistic, and I understand as well that there's some headaches that come with that. If I'm on a part of a coaching team and there's two of us, and I'm thinking, well, if I get 10 extra players, that's a headache because we have to find more coaches. But I suppose from just my experience for the whole thing, and for anyone that's on today, look, we've all seen it, guys, where there's been teams coming out of minis at whatever numbers, and we see that they maybe take their eye off the ball a little bit with bringing in new players. And I feel if the numbers grow and we have as many kids just experiencing it as possible, and those kids will have different layers, as you said, some of them will be the thirds player, some of them will be the senior AIL player, some of them might only play for another additional year, but the massive benefits that come from growing your player pool is massive. From a personal point of view, you just multiply the amount of enjoyment you see for players. So rather than that smaller pool of players enjoying it, now you see more and more players. And what tends to happen is, and I know it's quite simple, is the numbers brings numbers. It'll start to almost where your recruitment and your retention will actually take the backseat as lads will start and girls will start to bring their friends. I suppose I would see with kids, there's a lot of kids that are quite confident and they'll find their local rugby club and they'll ask their mum or dad, or there'll be a history there. But there's an awful lot of kids out there that are just waiting to be asked, or maybe rugby was something. I was personally that guy. There was no rugby history in my family, so it was a case of until someone actually asked me and told me that I was good enough to come down and play. That was a big thing for me. So my philosophy really would be, I know it's very idealistic, but we would be, if anyone had half as much enjoyment out of rugby as I did, and all the cups and all the leagues and all the success will come on the back of that. But if we get participation right and we grow our game, all the other things that maybe that we can improve in the game will take care of itself. That would be my opinion on it.
Yeah, great point there, and really hones in on what our philosophy should be. I suppose my own philosophy would be around playing an expansive game and letting people make their own choices on the pitch. And I had to reflect on that when I was started coaching. Do my sessions mirror this, or am I tell in my sessions? Because if I want players to be explorative and actually have a go, and this is at all ages, you have to go and allow them to do that in training sessions as well. I suppose the last tidbit I'm going to leave you with before we hand back to Conor is, we have an opportunity as coaches and as mentors to these young people that there's three main influences in a young person's life. So when you look at their families, so their parents, you look at their schools, so their teachers, and you look at their exercise, their sporting activities, so their coaches. At home, their parents are telling them what to do a lot of the time. If you're my kids, you're not actually doing it, but I'm still telling them. If you're a teacher, do your homework, do all the stuff that I'm telling you to do. When kids go to a rugby club or any sports club or any athletic activity, they're generally going because they're choosing to do that. So you have a captive audience. So you have probably the best chance of going and affecting behaviours, affecting positivity and in the person, as opposed to just a player. So we see the player first, and let's actually focus on them and use this opportunity to go and help them develop as well. Conor, I'll throw it back to you.
Thank you, Colin. That was great. So what I'm going to do now is just we've had a good few questions that have come in. I'm going to put it to our experts. And the first one, I'm actually going to go back to you, Colin. And the question that has come in from Brendan McCord is, any suggestions on how to deal with conflicting training days with other sports? Colin, do you have any thoughts on how to manage and organise your training, obviously when there's so many options out there?
Yeah, look, it's a hugely difficult scenario, and especially now, we're seeing it magnified as we don't tend to play too much across the summer. some of the keys I think Conor has picked out in what he was saying, but having those conversations with coaches across in other sports at that area, and especially finding out from your players or their families, what are those choke points, what are those issues, and who are the people that you need to speak to. You need to get that understanding to start off, and then try and work around it. I think a key part as well is going in and letting the players and their parents know, or their guardians, that it's okay to just come down and watch a session, or to miss one session to go and be at the next session, because player burnout is one of the things that will turn them off all sporting activity. And again, there's times we can be selfish, but there's other times that we just want to make sure that people stay active. So look, they would be some of the things, the conversation with the coaches across the other sports, and the conversations with the player or parent of the player, to make sure that, that rugby club is a welcoming environment, that you aren't worried about them missing a training session, because sometimes it might be a better idea for them to go and sit that one out.
Yeah, thanks a million for that. And obviously the most important thing here is the player themselves and their own happiness as well. And we've got to create that environment to basically, so that the player stays involved, and the player gets, as Colm says, has that activity and is involved in that. The next question I'm going to go to is Conor. If I can ask you, Conor, we've had a question around a kind of a mixture between a team who's half competitive and half wants to have fun. And it's basically, I suppose the question to you, Conor, I'd put is, as you as a coach, is how do you manage that situation where half the team want to turn up and they're very, they're just there to have a bit of fun, and the other team are way more competitive? And like, what is it? How do you blend those two together?
Yeah, look, for me, it's a tricky one, and it depends on their age group, obviously, and they're all maturing at different times. I think even with younger players, like kids at 13, 14s, whatever, it's okay to kind of sit down, not too formally, but just to, set some goals, what you'd like to achieve. I suppose our job as the adults and the coaches is to try and guide them away from putting goals around, actually specifically winning and losing, like around improving, enjoying ourselves, that the training sessions are, I suppose there's a purpose to them, that we want to all improve and get better. I think even the kids that are there to have fun do want to get better. And look, I think our thing is to kind of be constant with that message of saying, well, look, if we do get better and we improve and we feel that we can do this through our games, through our condition games, through our small sided games, and through our, skill development there, we feel that the other stuff will come from it. I think with young players, we've got to keep going back to that message of it's too big just to think we want to win the cup, because that's just too big a thing, that it's immeasurable. But what we can say is each night we come down, lads, if we get better, that's something we can control. So we can work hard in training, we can have fun in training, and from that, the good things will happen and the results will kind of take care of themselves. I suppose involving parents early on, and saying, look, this is the thing that we're going to push all the time. And, I suppose trying to bring the players along on the journey with you, rather than setting goals for them, try and listen to them, see what they want to achieve, and then I suppose trying to manage expectations and ultimately trying to meld that thing of, doing the good things enough in training, everything else will take care of itself. That would be my thoughts on it.
That's brilliant. Thanks a million. And again, it's creating those sessions where everyone's going to have fun, whether they're actually there for the fun environment or there for the competitive environment. If your sessions are stimulating and enjoyable, then everyone's going to get something out of it as well. So if I can bring in Ken more, Ken, just want to ask you in terms of the transition, I suppose, from the minis to the youth. Obviously, we're dealing with, different size pitches and that sort of going into maybe a full size pitch and different rules around. Could you basically give us an idea of, how do you build that? Is it the early sessions, or how do you make that gradual progression for a team that's transitioning into, from minis into sort of youth rugby?
Yeah, so what's important there, I suppose, is the increase in space and increase in numbers too. And sometimes, it can fall on a certain number of coaches that might think that, okay, we're going to a bigger pitch now, so we need to increase the fitness levels of our players to cope with that. But what we actually need to do is actually put that player in that environment and just let them explore that space now. So what I'd be doing is, in my training sessions, I would be changing the dynamics of the pitch, changing the sizes of the pitch we play, going from narrow, going to wide, changing the numbers of players, and just letting players explore this new pitch and this new environment. And it's as simple as that, really. Challenging their pass maybe over a wider distance, because again, that increase in space. And having a bit of fun with the rules, you know, because they're allowed kick now, so maybe putting in some kicking rules and yeah, just let the players explore and not be too strict on it.